Welcome back to RCR Wireless News. I'm joined now by Ken Kolderup. He is Chief Marketing Officer at Taqua. Ken, thank you very much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
So you joined Taqua when Taqua purchased Kineto to sort of bring some device-side technology for voice-over-Wi-Fi. So it would be great if you could give us a little bit of insight into the user experience with voice-over-Wi-Fi, how that happens for the user. Does it interact with the cellular network? Does the call have to be on Wi-Fi the entire time, or can it move over to the cellular network? I think people are interested in understanding how it works.
All right, yeah, and if I take a little bit of a step back, there's a lot of discussion about voice over Wi-Fi, and there's many different technologies and services that look to deliver voice services over Wi-Fi. What Kineto and now Taqua, our combined companies, have been doing for quite some time is we look at voice over Wi-Fi very specifically from the mobile operator community, the mobile service providers. And by the way, that definition of who's a mobile service provider is growing, and that's a whole other discussion. But it is a way for a mobile operator to leverage Wi-Fi as a way to deliver voice and messaging services. Now, the interesting thing from an end user's perspective is it's probably the most boring thing in the world. The whole point of voice over Wi-Fi for the mobile operator is to provide a very transparent experience to the end user, so that whenever they connect their smartphone to Wi-Fi, they continue to do voice and messaging the way they do today. They make calls using the native dialer in the phone. They send messages using the standard messaging app, or make calls using any third-party app that's on the phone that makes a mobile call. And what happens in the background is that those calls will now go over the Wi-Fi radio when you're connected to Wi-Fi radio rather than the macro network. So again, from an end user's perspective, the whole point is to be transparent. The reason the operators are doing it is to try and give the subscriber a better user experience for those key services. Is one of the continuing challenges for operators, really since the onset of the whole mobile industry, is addressing indoor coverage challenges from the macro radio network, and really, in locations like home and office where we spend most of our time, that's a very difficult environment to reach for a lot of reasons. And what a lot of operators have discovered, and we looked at many years ago, is a belief that while there is this challenge of coverage, lo and behold, the entire consumer population is building this high-performance in-building wireless infrastructure around you that's in these exact locations that's difficult. So if there were a way for the operator to leverage those and extend their services over those networks, it could go a long way to solving their coverage issues.
Right, and that brings up the question of whether operators can monetize those connections at all. Obviously, if people are on Wi-Fi, it's not necessarily the operator's access network, but do operators see a way to get value from that, or is it just something that they feel they have to do to maintain their customer base?
I think it's a little bit different answer depending on market and carrier situation. But for most operators, mobile operators in larger developed markets, the primary reason is not revenue, increasing the revenue. It really is improving the service that you're already delivering. Because one of this comes down to churn reduction, really. And if you've talked to a lot of operators that are deploying this today, T-Mobile in the U.S. and others are very vocal about why they're doing this, is it really helps to address an ongoing coverage challenge they have, and that the benefit that they end up seeing is a reduction in churn. Because if you look at a lot of the studies that are out there, one of the primary reasons for churn is network coverage issues, and specifically a lot of that is in home and office environments. So I think now, as we talked about before, a lot of these pieces are now in place such that if you just extend your existing voice and messaging services out over Wi-Fi and allow your subscribers to use that, you can go very quickly toward addressing a big challenge, a part of that coverage challenge, and therefore lower your overall churn.
Right, but people are going to want to have a seamless experience. So if a person is using voice over Wi-Fi in building and they leave the building, they can't just seamlessly transition to the cellular network at this time. Is that correct?
No, they can. The technology does support that, and we have a number of deployments where allowing for call transfer or call mobility between the Wi-Fi and the macro network is supported. Not all networks do it, but some operators are really want to see that experience. So that that absolutely can happen, and I think going forward you'll see most of the deployments actually supporting that mobility.
So there are some deployments here in the U.S. that are supporting that?
Yeah, in fact, if you look at T-Mobile in the U.S., their more recent launch with the Apple iPhone actually supports handover between their Wi-Fi network and their LTE network using VoLTE. There's other techniques for doing the handover from Wi-Fi to VoLTE or from Wi-Fi to the existing 2G and 3G network, and that's one of the unique things that we provide is the ability to support either of those models. So carriers, if you have VoLTE, you can transition to a VoLTE network, and if you don't, you're just doing voice over Wi-Fi first, we can allow you those calls to transfer from Wi-Fi to your existing 2G or 3G cellular voice service.
Okay, great. That's great to know. And then finally, I did want to ask you about the announcement we saw this week from Aptilo. They are obviously in the space as well and offering a solution for operators that have deployed IMS already. Can you speak a little bit to the significance of IMS? Is this a prerequisite for voice over Wi-Fi or not?
I think there's certainly, well, I'll back up a little bit, and for those that are familiar with what IMS is all about, but there is an overriding new architecture that mobile operators are moving toward to facilitate the transition of their services from circuit-based over to packet-based, and that is the IP multimedia subsystem, the whole IMS infrastructure that goes along with that. That does provide them, IMS does provide them with a platform now to start adding a number of new services as well as transitioning their existing services over to the IP domain. Voice is one of those. VoLTE and voice over Wi-Fi are presumed to be two services that would then be deployed in an IMS infrastructure. So yes, there's a lot of, that is kind of the prescribed method is to do this in IMS, and as we as a vendor, we support that. So we provide core infrastructure to enable voice over Wi-Fi and VoLTE and other next generation IP services that can be done in an IMS environment. But one of the unique things we also do is we can allow the operator to do this prior to deploying an IMS network, and that's a fairly unique thing for us. A lot of operators have IMS on their roadmap, but that's still a little bit down the road. Doing an IMS deployment is a pretty significant investment, not only in the products that you need to do that, but the deployment of it and operation of it is a fairly significant undertaking to do that. So for those operators that have not yet made that investment, we allow our infrastructure to operate in a pre-IMS environment, so you don't have to make that investment yet. But yes, we can support either. But yeah, and most people do view this as an application or a service that rides in an IMS environment. Okay,
good to know. And finally, before we finish, I'd like to let you share a little bit of the history of Taqua's acquisition of your former company, Kineto. I think it's interesting how that whole merger was motivated, I think, by Apple's announcement that it would support voice over Wi-Fi in iOS 8.
Well, I think a lot of things came together at once. It really made sense for the two companies to come together. Kineto, as a company, we've done a number of things in this space. We were one of the early pioneers in the whole voice over Wi-Fi area, having done this with operators since the early 2000s. And all of a sudden, over the last couple of years, as we've seen, with smartphone penetration taking off, Wi-Fi penetration taking off, carriers' attitudes and consumer attitudes towards Wi-Fi really aligning up very well. All of a sudden, we started seeing a big resurgence in voice over Wi-Fi. And what we did is we started, in working with a lot of operators, we found ourselves in a number of those accounts working with Taqua as the infrastructure provider behind those announcements, behind those engagements. And so we saw the companies working more and more together. In fact, we had a number of operators that suggested it might be nice if the two companies actually came together and they could have one supplier that would not only give them the core network, but would allow them to enable their handset installed base as well. So that started some discussions, and we found ourselves working more and more together. The iPhone thing is an interesting thing. I think that was one thing that came along in April, May of last year, which was more of one of the hurdles we had in working with operators around the world for the last several years is they like the fact that they could deploy a voice over Wi-Fi service for their Android phones, but a lot of them have a significant population of iPhone as well. And so a lot of them were kind of on the fence waiting to see what was going to happen with Apple. And so when Apple did announce their support for voice over Wi-Fi, that did change the game quite a bit. And a lot of operators that took away one of the reservations they had in pursuing this. And it really has changed the interest level of what we're seeing and the activity level of what we're seeing in voice over Wi-Fi. So, and that was just more reason that we thought that there's a significant, we see a lot of activity over the next 18, 24 months, and we, as a the companies looked at we'd have a great opportunity to go after that as one entity, and that kind of helped bring us together.
Excellent. Well, it's an interesting story, and we will keep following it. Ken Kolderup, CMO at Taqua, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.